Art Taker, and today we'll be talking about the 8 levers for S&OP/IBP success. And really what this is a framework for guidance to consider when implementing S&OP or revitalizing or improving an existing process. And what I'd like to do today is talk to the levers a little bit, to share some best practices, and then to answer some questions. And we do have the chat box on, so at any point, if you would like to ask a question, just go ahead and use the chat box for that, and then we will take a look at some of those towards the end of the session. So with that, I've got one slide on a little bit of background, and then we'll get right into the 8 levers. You can see from the logos that most of the work has been in chemicals, in energy, and that would be both on the upstream and the downstream sides, as well as consumer products, and some in pharmaceuticals and high tech as well. The service offerings are built around sales and operations planning, as well as the underlying supply chain planning processes underneath those, and the supporting information technology, if that's evaluation, selection, and implementation of systems that's needed. Oftentimes, too, you get into some organizational questions or considerations where companies might need to tweak a little bit in their organizations. Maybe that's part of the supply chain organizations or the interfacing parts, or they may be interested in a wholesale change related to that. So we would provide those services as well. So in addition to the kind of more comprehensive service offerings, we also have a fairly developed practice in training and coaching with a fairly mature course on S&OP. And this is good for some clients. All they may need is to get kicked off and a little bit of momentum and training at the beginning of their effort with potentially some follow-up. And I would say in terms of differentiators, aside from, say, the expertise in S&OP, there is the subject matter material, but also it's more of a holistic approach in terms of emphasizing performance improvement, leadership developing behaviors, results management, management of KPIs, and so forth. All of this. I mean, S&OP is a great platform for these items, and we emphasize these points in the methodology as well. So the model is very flexible. It would accommodate the needs of mid-market firms, maybe with more targeted support, as well as the needs of larger global companies using a network of experienced consultants really throughout the world. So we do have capability to develop and deliver cross-geography and cross-visit unit situations. So I won't speak too much on myself, but I've been at it for about 18 years now, and I've led lots of large projects all over the world, and I've got about $500 million in benefits for clients thus far across the projects, and I'm looking for at least another $500 million before I finish. So with that, let's move on, and why don't I start here in the upper left with this blue box? And by S&OP, I'm really referring to the management level cross-functional planning and decision-making process. And in the green box, you can see in the Nexview specific definition where S&OP is the vehicle for communication, performance management, and decision-making related to integrating financial, demand, supply planning to meet company objectives. Right? There's a few definitions out there in the marketplace, and this is the one that we believe is most appropriate for what we're trying to accomplish with S&OP. So on the diagram here, you can see that I'm depicting the S&OP cycle as a continuous flow as opposed to, say, a linear flow of components or meetings, if you will. And I've got pre-S&OP there in the middle because that's really the element of the S&OP flow that's really connecting everything else. So and I also want to emphasize that these are typical components. Each design is company specific. Companies may not need all of these, or they may have other ones, depending on their specific needs. So we'll start with I'll just briefly go through the cycle here. Portfolio review. All these meetings are exception-based, but this would be an exception-based review of new product introductions coming into the company and into the supply chain, and how we integrate those with our supply chain and our financial planning. All right, so take a look at a demand stream of how that new product is being introduced. We'd also be looking at the portfolio in general, if there are issues with it, or where we're going to take it, or how the products are working amongst themselves, etc. And what the longer-term opportunities are for the portfolio. Review a new product introduction scorecard as well. That information would feed into the demand review, where we would critically review the various components that make up our demand plan, typically inputs from sales and marketing, and input from what we had last month as our forecast, and is that still going to be good? If there are any promotions to be discussed, we will include those here. What the statistical forecast said, as well as what our demand manager thought, bringing some of those together and some thoughts before that and some questions to bring in here. So we go through that in demand review, the output of which is a consensus unconstrained demand plan. That then would feed in over to the supply side of the company. They would take a look at that, figure out if there are any constraints or any issues related to supplying that demand over the horizon that we've discussed and that we've designed into our process. If there are imbalances in between supply and demand and or gaps to our financial plan, we would address those in a pre-S&OP and try to provide solutions and make decisions there. If there are elements that are involving very high amounts of money, we may have to kick those up to an executive S&OP that typically is integrated with the rest of the executive management system, and we would make decisions associated with that at the executive level, as well as confirm the highest level plan. Okay. All right. So moving on to slide 5. These are the 8 levers, and we could have a webinar specific to each one of these. And today we'll have enough time just to show a little bit about each one: vision, sponsorship, design, organizational alignment, reporting and tools, enabling technology, results, and change management. All of these things go into designing an S&OP process or improving an existing one. So as I say, I've got a slide or two on each one of these that follow, share some best practices and lessons learned with these along the way. So let's go ahead and get into that. And first, talk about a vision. It's very important to start out with a vision, and some key things to ask in that area or to include in that would be, how did you define S&OP? How should you define S&OP? What's it going to include? What's it not going to include? And what it's really going to accomplish for the business, and specifically what results are going to be impacted through our S&OP process, right? It's very important to kind of get grounding on this. And I think the critical lesson learned here is, in addition to aligning the team around this, we're also going to use this vision to help us manage the scope throughout the project. You might also include things like how it's going to roll out. You may not know all of that at the get-go when you're coming up with your vision, but you can always kind of tweak that as time goes on. But it's okay to put some of that and put some overriding statements in there about how we're going to want process standardization, or what kind of technology support we expect to have at what point in time, and again, emphasis on the business results. And what I would suggest is that certainly you have a sponsor that's involved in this, but maybe let the core team take a first crack at that. Maybe with a little bit of offline guidance to a couple team members from the sponsor. Write that down. It becomes part of a communication package that'll be used later with various rollout meetings and initial training sessions, and as you roll the meetings out themselves. Okay. Here's an example of a vision, and what I would suggest, instead of trying to come up with a long sentence or a couple of sentences in a short paragraph, maybe just jot down 6, 8, 10 bullet points that talk about what this vision is going to be. You can still do this concisely, but you can also be thorough with a tight set of bullet points. So let me just go through that for the people that are on the phone and may not have access to the slides. So the first one says, we understand that S&OP is the aggregate and coordinated planning layer above the detailed supply chain planning processes, and we'll identify several gaps in the underlying processes, but we won't address them all as part of this project, right? So that really delineates what S&OP is, and that there'll be a lot of good ideas that come out of this, but we're really going to have to manage the scope for the amount of time and resources that we have before we want to get some results from this. Second bullet says all business units will participate in S&OP, so nobody can really opt out. And we've agreed that a consistent process and set of tools will be used. We want to do that to the extent we can. There may be some area of the business where we have to make some differences and some tweaks in the process. Okay, next bullet point says we'll have a viable and sustainable way to aggregate data at the product family level and can produce a rolling 18-month plan. I don't know if 18 months is the right number, but it's going to be different in each case. But here we're assigning or we're communicating some level of timing associated with this and some level of discussion that we've decided that we want to speak to in our S&OP meetings. That'd be the product family level. Okay. The S&OP process will be a key input into the budgeting process. So this says that, hey, this is going to be integrated with the financial planning, and we're going to provide, the driving input into that. Our S&OP plan will help us with our next budgeting cycle. Will help stabilize roles and responsibilities in the organization is the next bullet. And then finally, in the last bullet, this is where we get the results in here. Hey, we're going to get some quantifiable, impactable, visible results from this. We'll reduce forecast error by 20%. We're going to reduce inventory by 15%. On time and full, we'll improve it by 8% through the process, right? So it's important to tie this back to business results as well. So that's an example, as I say, 6, 8, 10 bullet points of a vision statement. And as I say, as you go through this, maybe you want to tweak it a little bit, as you go through a pilot program and so forth. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the sponsor a little bit. And on this slide, when I say the sponsor, what I mean is the overall executive sponsor of the entire S&OP process, where all of the components kind of rolled up. Later in the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about a component sponsor for each S&OP meeting in that flow when we talk about roles and responsibilities. But the overall sponsor, certainly needs to communicate that vision. But I think probably the most important lesson here about the sponsor is the sponsor needs to make sure that S&OP topics are brought into the S&OP meetings. It's very typical when companies start using S&OP that the sponsor and the S&OP leader will come up with great agenda item topics, for the next S&OP meeting a week or so, or a couple of days before the meeting, only to find out that, oh yeah, we've already made a decision on that topic through some other offline meeting. And, that's the sort of thing that can undermine the S&OP process. But if it goes on continually, it'll take the teeth out of having the meeting and, doing it in a more structured manner. That's the sort of thing that your sponsor needs to put a stop to. And it's natural. It's just because people are, that's the way they're used to doing it, and they're not thinking about that. Oh yeah, that's a perfect S&OP topic that we need to coordinate with the S&OP lead and the sponsor of that to bring into that next cycle. Okay. The sponsor is also going to be allocating resources or ensuring that there's enough resources, working with his or her peers, doing the coaching part wherever that's required in the organization and at the right level. The other thing, too, is depending upon your scope, you will either, if you're having a global process or a regional process, your sponsor can help be the linkage between those 2 points. For example, if you're working at the regional level or the business unit level, your sponsor can, help integrate that with the global S&OP process and likely be the key participant that plugs into that process. Conversely, if you're working at the corporate or the global level, that sponsor person can coordinate with the regional leaders to make sure that their pieces and participation is plugging in as expected. So I'm often asked, who is the best sponsor in the organization? What type of a role is best for that? And it's very easy to point to the top business executive or the CEO or the GM to be the sponsor, and that person certainly needs to be behind this and be in the background supporting this and getting his or her staff members on board with this. But I find that person may want to delegate this as well. It depends on the size of the company, too. Especially in larger organizations, you might find that this person might delegate it. But it needs to be delegated to a person on his or her staff. Vice President of Supply Chain is probably the most popular role for this if your organization has that level of individual in there. The COO or VP of Operations is another good role for this. Chances are, though, you likely have this person on board already as part of the process. So if it makes sense to engage another member of the executive team in the sponsor role, then that's often a good way to go. More and more CFOs are becoming sponsors of S&OP, especially as their roles are changing a little bit. Over the last few years, they've been looked to provide more operational leadership, if you will, and they can often be a bit more impartial in terms of refereeing or helping out with the other members of the executive team. So that's often, and if your CFO is the sponsor, then that's also going to be very good for the financial integration piece of this. VP of Sales or Marketing can also be a good role as long as they have the operational background to be involved in this. Potentially a CIO. It can't be seen as an IT project, but in some cases that might be a good fit as well. And I think the bottom line is it can be any of these roles as long as that executive has cross-functional expertise and influence. Okay, let's move over to the design here as we work our way around the critical levers. So I've got a couple of slides on overall design guidelines for S&OP, and I want to make a point about the best practices. And one of the learnings is that there are a set of best practices or commonly understood practices about what S&OP should be and what you should include in your process, what horizon it should cover, what level of discussion it is, who should be involved, and so forth. All of these things are in the best practice set, if you will. But the point I want to make is that best practices, they may not be best for your organization, and they need to fit with what is best for your situation. For example, I can remember one client that I worked with where for them, the right horizon was 0 to 3 months for us to cover the S&OP process. Now, best practice would say, well, no, you should have your discussion probably starting at 3 months and, going out 12, 18, 24 months or even longer. But in this particular case, they had a very short supply chain. We didn't get the full financial integration piece, right, in this particular case. However, that made the most sense for them, where they were in their development as a company and where they were in implementing S&OP. So it needs to fit. Look for consistency across business units where you can, but don't force it where it doesn't belong. For example, if you got a part of your business that's make to stock or make to forecast, and then another piece that's make to order, that's going to be a different situation. It's going to, the reports are going to look different. So, don't try to force one on the other, I guess is what I'm saying. You'll get a lot of resistance from those involved if you do that. Another overall guideline would be to clearly define and document each participant's role. Be realistic about your ability to provide the infrastructure to support your design. And here I'm talking about the IT. Make sure that you've got enough IT horsepower to provide the views that you need for each of the S&OP component meetings, and be realistic about how fast you can roll that out in terms of encompassing your entire business. And the last point that I'll make here is if you're coming up with a design and it's really unclear as to who the component sponsor should be, or you've got three sponsors in one meeting, then that can point to some awkwardness in the organization and a need to maybe take a pass at that as well. So if we look at this little picture here of the stool, where I'm showing that S&OP is coordinating or aligning the organizational structure and accountability, the financial reporting structure, as well as the data structure that's underneath. S&OP needs to align with those things, or as we go through the project, we need to help align those things. In many cases, in many organizations, they aren't. There are some differences that S&OP can help push those in the right direction to get those better aligned. Okay. The other thing that you get into is, if you're doing this across multiple divisions, is, well, should I have several S&OP processes that work in parallel, and then one that rolls it up at the end, or should I have multiple business units participating in a single one? All of these things you get into, and it's different for different situations. On the next slide here, I want to talk a little bit about some of the differences between divisional level or BU level S&OP and the corporate level S&OP. The bit different agendas and so forth, and depending on your structure and the level of, say, operating hands-on influence or involvement that corporate may have in your business unit, that can drive how these two bodies, if you will, or parts of the organization will interface. Having S&OP roll up or roll down, right? So let me start with the division. First here in the lower left-hand corner. Certainly they have a BU or a division level scope. Each one may have a different type of supply chain, markets they serve, strategies, products. You could also get some of those things within BUs, right? And then you need to, talk a little bit about, okay, do we need to have a process within the process, or make some changes, or can we go for the 80% solution, or should we just design this for the 80% part of our business? And you get into all of those kind of things. Again, do we have separate processes for each BU, or do we roll them up at the end, or do we have parallel processes ongoing? to help each business unit manage their own business. This can help prepare the GM or the lead participate at the next corporate level, right? You also may have some differences in the frequency, right? I mean, let's talk a little bit about the corporate, right? Corporate priorities, enterprise level strategies. Oftentimes it is just a financial consolidation. Frequency of the meetings might be different. For example, at the BU level, you may be doing this on a monthly basis. The corporate level, maybe it's just a quarterly basis, and it's a financial consolidation. As I say, it depends upon how much operational detail the corporate level gets into. They could be doing things, however, like cross-asset capital allocation. You may have centralized resources, right, in your supply chain that are being used to support multiple BUs, right, like plants or distribution channels. You also could be allocating centralized shared services personnel. You may have a centralized center of excellence supply chain organization, right? In all of these kind of cases, then you may have a little bit more involvement at the corporate level, and they may have a little bit more direct linkage to the BU level S&OPs, right? On the prior slide, we're talking a little bit about helping to align that with the organization and the design in terms of how it fits with the org structure and so forth. And just a couple of tips on the S&OP component elements for that. On the commercial and the product elements of S&OP, and here I'm talking about maybe a portfolio review or the demand review. Typically, those are aligned with how the sales force is organized and how you face the market, right? In terms of, say, number of demand reviews you're going to need, and who should be in which one, and so forth. On the supply side, I would suggest aligning those to how the supply assets and the planning processes support that demand. For example, you may have, let's say you have a plant in China, and that plant in China just supports the Chinese demand. Okay, well, you probably have a separate supply review related to that plant in China. However, if you have a plant in China, a plant in North America, and a plant in, say, Brazil that all support Chinese demand, then you'll have multiple plants and assets and so forth in your supply review because you'll be making decisions about where that demand will be sourced and produced from amongst your plant network. So it's a little bit dependent upon, say, the geometry of the supply chain, as I like to call it. At the pre-S&OP and at the executive S&OP levels, those typically be designed with how cross-functional decisions are made and how potentially cross-business unit decisions are made, as well as the financial reporting structure, right? So for a particular financial reporting structure, there you would have the various participants at the pre-S&OP and executive S&OP levels, right? So it's a fairly complicated subject, kind of all on one slide there. So, but those are just some overall guidelines to help as you go through your design work. Okay. On the next couple slides, what I've given you here is a checklist of some things to consider as you go through this. And I want to talk a little bit more broadly at first. So overall parameters, the things you need to get down are, what is my planning time horizon going to be for my process? Is it 6, 12, 18, 24 months? What's that going to look like? And I would suggest that each component of the S&OP process have a consistent horizon, right? So our plans look the same. Our discussion timing is the same, right? And as we know, what drives the planning time horizon? Well, it's got to cover the longest lead time item, right? And for S&OP purposes and financial integration purposes, it's got to be adequate for financial planning, right? So I mentioned that example earlier before where we had a very short supply chain, but we didn't really get the financial integration piece completed on this particular project, which was a gap, but it's a room for improvement. I mean, it is a continuous improving process, but So in that case, operationally 3 months was fine for that client. However, that wasn't good enough for financial planning and what was required on an ongoing basis to project financials, right? So both pieces are important. Okay, so the planning time horizon, the frequency of the process is going to happen at monthly, quarterly, and this has to do with the period of time that schedules don't change and how often items come up in the business that need interfacing functions to collaborate and make a cross-functional decision. I would suggest that in most businesses that's typically not quarterly. That's typically monthly is typically the right timing for the frequency of S&OP. Okay, another one would be the time fence, or the frozen period, right? What is the period of time by which the plan becomes frozen, right? And, I mean, ideally, when we're having S&OP meetings, we're not really talking about this month, possibly not even next month, right? We want to have this, 2, 3, 4 months out in the future, right? So there's enough time to take action where we need to meet our plans and make decisions that are best in the business, right? So decide upon a frozen period, if you will. Business drivers that will interact with one another, typically in a manufacturing situation, that's sales, production, and inventory. But there could be other components that are important to put on S&OP reports, right? Different from KPIs, right? Maybe it's not, I'm talking about more planning drivers and the elements that really drive items in the business that need to be coordinated, right? Sales, production, inventory. When one of those changes, the others change, right? But different situations, you may want different things on those reports, right? Also, what level in the planning hierarchy is appropriate for reporting, planning, and discussion? Typically, that's at the product family level is most of the time what makes sense. But it's a question to ask, and it's a discussion to have. Okay. Moving into the next area, this S&OP components. What component meetings are we going to have? Demand review, supply review. Do we need portfolio review? Well, that depends on our business, right? If we have lots of SKUs and lots of portfolio decisions and introducing lots of new products, then maybe it makes sense. I certainly see that in most of my CPG clients as well as high tech, but in specialty chemicals too. But where the product portfolio is a bit more stable, or there just aren't a lot of products like in downstream oil and gas, right? We've got a couple of grades of unleaded, we got diesel, and we got jet, and maybe that's not changing as much. So we don't need that component. Or there may be some cases where you want a separate inventory meeting or a separate supplier procurement related meeting. This is all fine. The point is that we need to see what's best for our business and define those components, okay? And then how many of each component, right? We're talking about before. We could have multiple ones of those depending on the way our org is structured and the way we financially report, okay? The other thing to consider, too, is how S&OP fits with the rest of the management system. And that's both on the shorter term with the executional, more weekly meetings, right? And how is that also going to integrate on the other end with the longer-term executive-level meetings? Do we have executive S&OP? Do we need a separate one? Or can that integrate with something that is already on the management's team, a monthly business review? How does it fit with quarterly business reviews? The point is that in your design, you need to think about how it's going to fit in the overall management structure. Okay. All right. Also, the schedule. The sequence of the S&OP component meetings and how much time we need in between them, what's going to happen on each calendar day in between S&OP component meetings, right? And these are typically the sub-process, the more detailed planning elements that are happening, right? When are last month's financials available, right? That could drive when we start the process. Now, if that's in week 3 of the month, we're certainly not going to wait until week 3 to start our S&OP process. And I've been in situations with clients where that is the situation, and our actuals end up being a month behind, which isn't ideal. But that's another opportunity to work on compressing the financial close and the reporting of last month's actuals so we can kick off our next month's planning. Okay. Okay, next level down for each of the components. What's the report format going to look like? What planning drivers, or what are we going to show on there? And then who's going to be the sponsor for that component? Who will facilitate? Who are the participants? Who are the inputs? And what are the inputs and outputs? What's a typical agenda look like? All of this stuff should be written down and written down on templates that are consistent across each of the S&OP components. Okay. All right, moving on to reports and tools. And here I'm just showing some supporting tools to support each one of the S&OP component meetings, right? So obviously you have your plan. I've put S&OP plan there on the graphic, but that's a demand plan or a supply plan or inventory plan, S&OP plan at the higher levels, right? So that's the reference plan used for analysis and used for planning. The one source of the truth, by definition. This is the right plan. And if the numbers aren't right on on this plan, let's get the right numbers on this plan as opposed to having several other plans around the company, right? Typically, they would have a few months of history to look at, as well as the go-forward planning horizon, whether that's 12, 18, or 24 months, right? And you also need a volume version of these plans and a monetized version of these plans, right? The plans should highlight exceptions on them, points where we're going to be behind on budget or where we've got a supply constraint and turns our inventory negative, right? I mean, these are indicators of exceptions, right? And those need to be highlighted on this plan in some way. In some cases, what some companies like to do is, instead of using the entire plan for that, they just like to suck the exceptions right off of that and show that on a summary fashion. That's another way to do that as well. Okay, each meeting should have a KPI scorecard with a set of KPIs that's appropriate for that view of the business. For example, in demand review, you may be looking at forecast error or forecast accuracy at the product family level. In pre-S&OP, maybe that rolls up to the business unit level. In executive S&OP, that rolls up to the company or corporate level, right? So each one, though, should have a set of KPIs. And then also an action log, recording actions, accountabilities, dates, decisions that were taken as well, so we can remember what decisions were made for for what reasons. And I talked a little bit earlier about making sure that roles and responsibilities for the meeting are written down. I just call it a meeting charter, and it just defines who's going to be there, who the sponsor is, what some of the key agenda items are, what are the inputs and outputs. If you don't do this, it's possible for that meeting to drift. And when somebody gets off track a little bit, you can always bring them back to like, okay, hey, our charter is supposed to be this for this kind of a meeting. And bring them back. Now, that's not to say we don't update and change the charters for these. We do as they make sense. Okay, and then in the middle here, I've just got some tips on meeting effectiveness. And what I'd also suggest is occasionally, you score yourself on these meetings. Come up with a little scorecard. Did we talk? Was it an exception-based meeting? What were the S&OP best practices that we incorporated into our design, and are we following those? Are we addressing gaps? Are we prepared? Are we making the right decisions? Are we proactive enough, right? And or are decisions getting delayed? How's our KPI review going? Are we getting to root causes? Are we setting actions that will impact KPI results? All of these things could go on a meeting effectiveness scorecard. Okay, got one slide here on IT. It's a big subject, but what I wanted to cover in today's session was just really what are some of the basic IT requirements we need to pull off S&OP successfully and make it sustainable? And then what are some of the advanced functionality that's now out there in the marketplace and becoming more affordable and easier to get? And I'd offer that the advanced functionality helps you do S&OP better, helps you become more effective, helps you produce results faster for your company, helps make the S&OP meetings a bit smarter, if you will. But let me start on the left with the basic requirements. So the first thing, data that people trust. Right? There's nothing that can derail an S&OP meeting more when you're trying to bring best practices in here, you're trying to launch your reports, get people comfortable with the time horizon we're talking about, get people comfortable with the level of discussion that we're trying to have, all of these things we're trying to do with S&OP, and then boom, somebody zeroes right in on one of the cells and says, no, that number is 83, not 103. And everybody gets distracted because of that. And then it also lessens the credibility of everything else you're trying to do in that meeting when the data's wrong. So data's got to be right. You've got to report at any level or be able to report at any level in the product hierarchy with views that match your S&OP design. Right? We're talking a little bit earlier about each of the S&OP components has their view of the design or has their view of the data that's right for their part of the business, right? So you've obviously got to be able to produce that report. And it has to be done in an automated fashion. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult to scale and keep up with this as you expand this throughout the business. Report historical actuals with go-forward plans, bringing those together on a monthly rolling basis. We talked a little bit already about being able to highlight exceptions on reports, being able to monetize the volume plans. And the other thing, too, is that you certainly need to be able to make changes and have those changes cascade throughout the business systems after you agree on numbers, right? We're in the demand review. We've got a few sources of demand coming in, and we've arrived on, a particular number when the statistics said one thing, the sales force said one thing, the demand manager did some analysis, had a recommendation. We all got to a consensus, and maybe it changed from the value that it was before the meeting. After we make that change, we've got to be able to cascade that down through the planning systems. Okay, and then KPI reporting too would be another basic IT requirement. On the advanced side, the systems now are getting very good at grabbing data from various systems around the company and bringing that together. They come with templates for reports already in place. Now, those might not be, they may call them best practice templates, but they need to be adjusted and critically reviewed for appropriateness for your situation. They're also coming with capability to cut the data by different views. For example, on our demand side, maybe we've got views of our demand at the product family level. And that's really what we're going with for the way we want to look at our demand and have our demand reviews cover that. However, it may be interesting to look at demand cut by customer, right? It just might be another view. So the systems are coming with the data cubes, right, to be able to look at various views and cuts of data in different ways. Scenario modeling is another key functionality that some of the systems are coming with. What if price changes? What if we outsource this? I don't know. What if the weather's bad or not? How is that going to affect what we need to do for our S&OP planning, and then how's that flow into the financials? That's also functionality that is more and more companies are trying to get smarter by using this in their S&OP processes. Electronic workflow, how are we routing these plans around to various people? Exception identification, we talked about. And the software firms, they're producing products that have the detailed planning functionality underneath them, production scheduling, inventory planning, supply plans, purchase plans, how the forecast is rolling up, all of these things, right? Now, necessarily, I wouldn't call all of that S&OP. I mean, it's more on the detailed supply chain planning process layers, obviously critical, but the tools are coming with capability to do that and then be able to generate S&OP on top of that. So it's becoming better. Okay, that's one quick slide on IT. Quite a bit more to say there, but all right. On this slide, I want to talk about results. So we only got a couple of boxes left, right, on the 8 levers. So we're getting there. I want to talk about kind of 3 levels of results. On the left here, I'm showing a diagram of a what is intended to be a KPI tree. And we talked a little bit about KPIs before on the tools part, but I just want to emphasize that you need to show KPI movement through the S&OP process. And the KPIs need to be distributed amongst the components, integrated with each other with respect to the right audience, the right view, the right level, etc. And in the middle here, you can see that I've listed some of the KPIs here possible that are typical that go through the S&OP architecture. Over here, I want to talk about results and the typical financial or the financial results that need to come from S&OP. If you're involved in a project, it's absolutely imperative that we not only track KPIs, that we talk about the dollar results as well. And how those are tracking. So you need to baseline those. They should have a target. There's an evaluation methodology, right, that happens. Oftentimes it's not so clear, right? Take something, or we're trying to reduce inventory, and that's going to, we're going to reduce it by 20%, and that equates to X amount of money. But what happens if sales wildly go up? Well, then we're going to need to add inventory. Or if sales wildly go down, then we're not going to be able to move product, right? So turns, right, non-dimensionalizes this, obviously, but that's one example. Another one might be freight costs. And, what happens if, fuel prices change, as we know they will. So, but it's important to nail that down, how we're going to track that. It also helps us with accountability definition. You need tracking tools in place. Get finance involved in this. They need to own the numbers, they need to agree with the benefits, and you need to review these on a regular basis, right? So those top 2 things are the more harder benefits from S&OP, if you will. On the lower piece here, I want to talk about a process for tracking maturity of your S&OP system, right? So we use a scale there, 0 to 4. Lagging, basic, functional, maturing, or leading. And depending on where you are in your process, you can assign characteristics to, what constitutes a 1 or a 3 or a 4, and chart where you expect to be over time, and then track that. Track the maturity of your S&OP system getting better. And this can help set expectations for the team, as well as communicate and define that maturity path. So all of these things are important to include. Okay. And then finally, on change management, lots of different information sources and lots of different things coming from different directions in S&OP, and lots of ways you could go, right? That's what this traffic light graphic is meant to indicate. And on the far right, the desired outcomes we want are that people are being communicated to, people are bought in, they know what to do, they're getting what they think they thought they were going to get, right? And they feel successful, the old way disappears, and you get the results, sustainability, and you start moving towards a culture change of a more performance-oriented culture, right? So to get those things, I would suggest that there are lots of different tools, techniques, and so forth that you need to encompass in your process to make sure that you get that. Right? There's the more softer things, such as coaching at all levels, what's in it for me, if you will. There's celebrating wins, root causing missteps where we have them. We all have them in all of our processes, and that's just part of what we go through to do that. People aren't surprised. We're communicating the vision. We have communication plans in place. We're conducting stakeholder analyses. We have defined roles and responsibilities. We have the more harder, more tangible elements of a project structure, team charters, project plans, milestones, project reviews, managing results. And all of these things help with the change management. People will respond to different ones in different ways with differing levels of effectiveness. So it's important to use a toolkit, if you will, of a variety of things. Okay. All right. Well, that's some comments on the 8 levers. Again, vision, sponsorship, design, organizational alignment, reports and tools, enabling technology, results management, and change management. If you cover these things, you'll be have the most success, or the highest chance of success with your S&OP process. So that's about all the material that I have. Other than that, I just want to let you know that Nexview will be offering a 1-day course on S&OP in various cities throughout the summer here. And it goes into the 8 levers with a little bit more detail, and we'll look at some exercises, and we'll look at a case study, and we'll really lay some of the tools out there, and have a chance to look at all of this stuff in a little bit more depth. It'll be a packed day, but we'll get these things in. Okay. All right. That's all I have. Why don't we take the remaining time we have? I guess we've got a little bit under 10 minutes here, just to see if there are any other questions that people would like to ask. Let's see here what came in. Okay, here's one. How long does it take to get S&OP up and running? Well, it depends on your company size and how much work you really need to do in the sub-processes, and how much work there is in assembling the reports. But you ought to be able to launch a pilot in some part of the business with some restricted or reduced data set within 2 to 4 months. Then, depending on the size of the rest of the implementation, you may take another 4, 5, or 6 to roll it out to the rest of the business. And then, to get good at it, some more iterations after that, 6 or 12 iterations after that, before you really get to the, higher stages of the, what I would call the S&OP maturity curve. But as I say, get something out quickly, and get people engaged in the process. It typically takes about 3 cycles for an S&OP meeting to become effective and really start helping the business. Okay. What are some key risks that challenge an S&OP implementation? Well, let me reiterate a couple. The first I'd say is not using the process for S&OP type decisions. Right? As I say, they'll take the air out of the tires of the S&OP meetings themselves. Not scheduling the meetings far in advance and doing it on an ad hoc basis, because people's schedules will be full, so those need to be laid out a year in advance, and it's just a regular thing that people have on their calendars. If they're traveling, they call in or send an informed delegate, if that makes sense for the situation. What else? Not being able to show the plans in the desired formats, and not showing results and not tracking results. I would say those are the key things. Not having an executive sponsor as well. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, here's one. How about the S&OP coordinator? Would you say that that's a full-time job? It doesn't have to be, and generally not. In the beginning, as you're trying to launch your process, there's certainly more work there, and also it depends upon the team around that person, the facilitators of, say, the various component meetings, and how strong and available they are to help support this. So, but no, I would say not. I would say maybe kind of in the 40% range as we're starting out, 50% range as we're starting out, and then hopefully tapering off into the 20-25%. Now, if it's a very large organization and this person is helping out with multiple processes in parallel, then it can be a little bit more involved. Okay. 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 What are some of the latest trends in S&OP? I would say that the financial integration parts are becoming more common, but that's still a piece where a lot of companies have opportunity for improvement. So hopefully we'll keep after that as part of that. So that's part of it. And then I would say even newer than that would be the extension of S&OP to trading partners. There's a couple of good case studies out there where companies have involved their trading partners in their S&OP, either on the supply side, and having specific supplier reviews that's feeding or participating in their supply review parts, if that's appropriate, or maybe they have a separate one, right? But the point is that they're involving them, and then on the customer piece as well, some of the pieces of collaborative planning, forecasting, replenishment, right? Those concepts are being brought in more as well, and a little bit better demand information, and then better decision support and scenario modeling. And with more of the focus on profitability scenarios would also be one of the things that I would say a latest point of emphasis. The other thing, too, is I think S&OP is being applied more in non-traditional environments as well. We're seeing it in other environments besides manufacturing. And an example of that would be what my company is doing with upstream oil and gas. It's a very different value chain than what we would see in manufacturing. But the needs, the basic fundamental needs of having to rally behind a consistent plan and managing cross-functional decisions on a monthly basis as things come up in the business, and then how does that interact with our financial planning and financial goals. I mean, all companies have those issues, so we're seeing that as well. Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for attending, and I will make the slides and the recording available shortly, and we'll be giving you a link such that you can have that information. So thanks very much, and have a great day.